Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. So I wanted to talk about Megan Rapinoe, who was recently confronted about her views on transgender athletes in women's sports. Now she's very vocal about believing that transgender athletes who are male should be allowed to compete in women's categories. Funny enough, she came out with this whole idea shortly before retiring. So she's pushing for something that will never affect her. She didn't seem to care about the younger athletes who are currently dealing with this situation, who are currently losing their spots, losing their places in competitions, being excluded. She cares about women's pay when it comes to sports. She wants them to get paid in a comparable way to the men, but she's perfectly happy for men to use their unfair advantage over women to dominate women's sports. So in Time magazine, I think it was in 2022, she came out and said that she's all for it. She doesn't believe that there's that many trans athletes anyway. So what difference does it make? I'm of the opinion that even when one female athlete is disenfranchised as a result of ridiculous policies that allow males into their sports, that's one too many. But Megan Rapinoe doesn't seem to think so. And we know that the US women's national team lost to high school boys. So she has experienced firsthand the advantage males have over females when it comes to sports. Even if you're a top performing female elite athlete who has won World Cups multiple times, you can still lose to high school boys. So look, there's no comparison. Males are obviously stronger and faster than female athletes. And that's not to take away anything from the women. It's just a completely different category. We have our own sports, men have their own sports. But athletes like Megan Rapinoe think it's okay for men to cross over into the women's category and act like that's fair. So she was confronted at a recent Pride event, asked about her stance on male athletes in women's sports, and her reaction was, "Not today, I don't want to deal with this." You would think she would be happy to promote her stance on this issue. When it suits her, she's very vocal about it. But when she's at a Pride event, she decides to keep silent. That doesn't make sense to me. So US women's soccer star Megan Rapinoe was the Grand Marshal of Seatle Pride on Sunday, where she was confronted by the post-millennial for her advocacy of boys playing girls' sports. Rapinoe and her team were famously beaten in a match against the FC Dallas under-15 boys squad and against the US women's national team in 2017. And we know that the women's soccer team also lost to some Welsh retired male footballers. They lost 12-0. So this is what she was asked when she was at the Pride event. Your US women's soccer team famously lost to high school boys. Do you really think it's fair for these same boys to be competing in girls' sports? Rapinoe would not respond. Instead, picking up her red solo cup and allowing her security guard to get between her and reporter Katie Davis-Court.
Your U.S. women's soccer team famously lost to high school boys. Do you really think it's fair for these same boys to be competing in girls' sports? Do you think it's fair? Why should trans people compete against young girls? Do you not think that they're going to get hurt? Are they going to get hurt? I'm a journalist, I just want to know. Megan!
Silence, no one, hold!
Cowardice at its finest. She's at a Pride event. She's surrounded by friends. And she can't speak up for transgender athletes? You know why? When it comes to virtue signalling and standing up for woke ideology, you want to be all vocal about it and get a pat on the back. But when you're confronted directly by somebody with common sense, you know how stupid it sounds for you to stand by what you said, even though you're at a Pride event, surrounded by LGBT such people, and you can't stand by what you said. I do question if these people actually believe what they're saying, or they're just trying to push an agenda. She knew it wouldn't affect her upon her retirement. In the UK, they have all these trans athletes in women's football. Injuries have been reported such as a broken knee, concussions. It's not safe, number one. You don't care about women's safety, Megan? And all she could do was remain silent. And this is the thing with these people. They don't want to address the questions laid out before them. They don't want to think critically about the policies that they are promoting, because facing reality exposes the flaws in this ideology, in this way of thinking. The flaws of allowing males into women's sports. It can't even hold up to its own scrutiny, because when you ask questions, they have nothing. And of course, she had to take a couple of sips of her drink when she was confronted with that question. So this is what she said in Time magazine. I would also encourage everyone out there who is afraid someone's going to have an unfair advantage over their kid to really take a step back and think what we are actually talking about here. We're talking about people's lives. I'm sorry, your kid's high school volleyball team just isn't that important. It's not more important than any one kid's life. Show me the evidence that trans women are taking everyone's scholarships and dominating in every sport, are winning every title. I'm sorry, it's just not happening. So we need to start from inclusion, period. And as things arise, I have confidence that we can figure it out. But we can't stand at the opposite. That is cruel. And frankly, it's just disgusting. Wow. She really didn't think this through, did she? She really didn't think it through. So when confronted with reasonable questions, she has nothing to say. Your kid's high school volleyball team isn't important. What? So a young girl who's excited about competing in sports and wants to have a fair opportunity, her feelings aren't as important as the so-called trans kid. If that's the case, leave the boys out of girls' sports. If it's not important, why do they need to be in the girls' category? Why don't they just compete with the boys if it's not important? It matters when it's important to the trans person though, doesn't it? It just doesn't matter when it's important to the girls. But guess what? This is girls' sports we're talking about. And they have the right to compete safely and fairly. And the fact is, no one who is male should be awarded a girls' scholarship. So it doesn't matter whether you think it's one person or hundreds of boys. It is happening, and even one is too many. There needs to be a blanket rule that states that you have to be female. If this is a girls' or women's scholarship, the rule should be that you have to be female. That's it. Doesn't matter how many. When we're talking about male athletes, they don't belong in women's categories. Just like they don't belong in women's categories, even if they don't identify as a woman, because they're male. Everybody has to compete in the correct category, and there shouldn't be special exceptions for people, because your sex doesn't change, your biology doesn't change. So that needs to be set in stone, because our sex is set in stone. Nobody who is born male turns into a female, ever. Please show me. You're asking people to show you all these examples of scholarships and trans people dominating women's sports. Please show me where a man has turned into a woman. Until then, Megan needs to keep quiet and stop advocating for women's sports to be ruined, knowing full well that it won't affect her. And in April, Megan was one of the athletes who signed the letter to the NCAA, urging them to continue to allow males in women's sports. She said transgender kids want the opportunity to play sports for the same reasons other kids do, to be part of a team where they feel like they belong. Proponents of these bills argue that they are protecting women. As a woman who has played sports my whole life, I know that the threats to women's and girls' sports are lack of funding, resources and media coverage, sexual harassment and unequal pay, she said. And this is a woman who hasn't had a trans athlete be on her team or be on someone else's team who she had to compete against. She did compete in a friendly match against boys though, and she lost. And she had the nerve to pretend that the unfair advantage is no big deal. As long as they belong to a team and they feel like they belong, apparently that's all that matters. Well, women also want to belong to a team with other women. They have the right to the expectation. That's what they signed up for. They didn't sign up to compete in a situation where the categories are blurred. And she made these comments in 2022 after she had that experience of losing to teenage boys. So she knows full well what she's advocating for, and she doesn't care because she wants to score her woke points. That was her goal before retiring. And she can go on about all those other issues. Those issues are important too. But it's not up to Meghan to decide that this issue takes precedence over another. Right now, males competing in women's categories is the biggest threat. As for pay, let's take the WNBA for example. When the WNBA is no longer subsidized by the men, then you can talk about equal pay. But until then, it's very unrealistic to say that you want to get paid a comparable amount to the men. They're not going to give women millions upon millions of dollars for playing basketball when the WNBA doesn't even make a profit. But right now, things are turning around, and it's taken a long time, but it is happening. But if we start introducing transgender athletes into the WNBA, all that progress will be ruined. So everything she's talking about being important to women's sports, those things are going to get affected too once we allow men into women's categories. And she had the nerve to say sexual harassment is also important. How do you think a woman feels having a man in her locker room? There have been reports of men leering at women. You invite the setup for sexual harassment when you say that men can identify as women and chained in the women's locker room. The young ladies who had to compete against Leah Thomas, many of them feel violated, especially when you find out that the person who claims to identify as a woman is just exercising a fetish. These activists are always contradicting themselves. They want to protect women from sexual harassment, but they want to invite male athletes into their locker rooms. They want to take away their safe spaces. How can you protect women from sexual harassment when you take away women-only locker rooms or female-only locker rooms? So in 2017, Rapinoe led her team to a loss against the under-15 boys FC Dallas team in preparation for the US team's match against Russia. The women's team were at the highest level of soccer competition for the fairer sex, while the boys were not even 15 years old. When it comes down to it, Meghan has nothing to say. But when it comes to talking to woke publications, she's telling you that your volleyball team doesn't matter as much as the trans person's feelings. She's telling you that your daughters and their feelings are not as important as making the boy feel that he belongs to a team in the girls category. Let's just ruin women's sports so that certain people can feel they belong to a team, even though they could be in the boys' team or they can be in an open category. But apparently that's not good enough. Unlike Meghan, we're not going to be silent when it comes to standing up for women's sports and girls' and women's rights and spaces. So let me know what you think. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe and comment. Take care of yourselves, and God willing, I will see you in the next video.